Welcome back to the River City Hardball Podcast. We're presented by DBAT Jacksonville, and it's a pleasure to welcome on Drew Linder. He's the recruiting coordinator for UNF baseball and an assistant coach with the Ospreys. And some really groundbreaking news this week with the increase in scholarships for many sports, but specifically in baseball, going from 11.7 to about 34 is what they're saying now. That'll take effect in fall of 2025. But first, Drew, thanks for jumping on today. Tell people a little bit about your background.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me on today. It's kind of funny. I think, when I first started in this industry, people always said that this kind of industry comes full circle. And, I grew up here in Jacksonville, born and raised here throughout my time, played at Nice High School, right down the road here from UNF, and ended up going over to Florida State. Spent 4 years over there as an undergrad assistant and helped Mike Bell over there with the pitching staff. Then once Coach Bell got the job up in Pittsburgh, I guess is about going on 7 years ago now. Asked me to come up there with him and spend some time up there. Spent 5 years up there with him as the director of player development and handled a lot of our analytics and helped out on the recruiting side of things. Along with you know working with him day to day standpoint with the pitching staff. So then when Coach Mercadante got the call to be the head guy here, he asked me to come down here, and obviously being a Florida guy and knowing the roots and the recruiting side of Florida, a lot of things made sense, and here I am coming full circle back home. So year one was definitely taught us a lot here, but we're certainly excited rolling into year two, and a lot of great things going on around here.
Drew Linder is our guest, the recruiting coordinator for UNF baseball. And this is right in your wheelhouse, the news that came out this week. So the NCAA is now going to increase scholarships for a lot of sports, but specifically in our conversation here, baseball scholarships beginning in fall 2025 are going to increase from 11.7 to 34. Drew, what is your reaction to that news?
Well, it's definitely, something that's been talked about for a long time, and obviously now it's coming full circle here. And I think as we look at what this kind of looks like, and as much as we feel like we have a lot of information on this change, there's certainly a lot of unanswered questions. Obviously we know that the rule is going to allow us to get to 34. I think each institution, conferences, those types of things, there's so many still unknowns out there, on how things are going to be handled. I think the biggest proponent to it right now on the surface is, right now, ever since COVID, we've been allowed to have 40 guys on a roster, and, certainly now going to cut that down to 34. And, I think when we take the financial component out of it and we certainly look at just the roster talent portion of it, I think that it's going to help mid majors and some of your division twos and junior college situations. With the quality of talent on their roster. I think that there's going to be guys that you have to spend a little bit more time evaluating. And I also think, there's going to be a handful of guys, that maybe once were power four type players that, now with the portal side of things that have made things, interesting, I should say, from that standpoint. It now allows for some of those higher profile high school guys to potentially land at mid-major schools.
How do you think this specifically impacts a program like UNF? Is this like when you guys heard this news, did you guys fist pump? This is huge for us. How did you guys react to it?
Yeah, I think it's like everybody. Everybody's trying to, certainly find out how this is going to impact them, from the recruiting side of things. I think, for us, we feel like we are in a situation that we can get players to, you know, ultimately come to North Florida, get excited about coming to North Florida. We certainly feel like this probably helps us maybe get a type of player or style of player that we maybe couldn't get 2 years ago, from that standpoint. So, more or less on the high school side of things, right? I think that the high school side of recruiting, people are asking, is it going to slow it down? Is it going to speed it up? How's it going to impact that? I think it's going to slow it down a little bit. I think it's going to, schools and recruiting coordinators and coaches are going to spend a little bit more time evaluating those types of players, because now you're kind of a little bit in a roster crunch situation. And, there's going to be value I think there's going to be more value. Coach Mercadante and I were talking about this. I think there's going to be a little bit more value in, giving guys the opportunity to be two-way players now. Certainly we were at 35, and I always felt like when you were at 35, you may have had one or two guys that, could pitch and hit. And, I think when you talk about the depths of bullpens and the depths of pitching staffs in today's game, 34 is going to, possibly force you to have one or two of those guys again.
Are there any negative impacts that you guys see about this?
Um, from the negative side of things, I don't quite have that answer. And I know I'm giving you, the roundabout a little bit. I just think that we've got to try to figure out and, how this is going to impact from a financial component. I think that that's the biggest question mark in a lot of, the college industry as a whole. I think when you look at it, schools around the country are going to look at, hey, how can we necessarily make ends meet and make this thing, really affordable from that side of things without, pushing these universities and athletic departments under. And I think that as we look at it from the coaching side of things and the coaching aspect, we certainly want to be in support to where we feel like we can compete from, the financial component that, the rest of our league's doing along with the rest of the schools here in the state.
When you mentioned that there are several unanswered questions about all this, what are maybe some of the few that you guys have that are unanswered questions? Do you have anything in mind that kind of top of mind of some questions you guys have yet to have answered?
Well, I think it's really coming down to, hey, we were at 11.7 for so long, right? And, I think as, college baseball coaches, the 11.7 factor was one of the toughest obstacles in all of college sports, because you're trying to divvy up 11.7 scholarships, amongst 27 to 30 guys, and how does that work out from a numbers game, to build the best roster you can. And, I think as we evaluate the situation and some of the questions, it's just going to be, okay, we knew we were at 11.7. We're now allowed to get to 34, and I think it's talking to our administration, our athletic director, and, Nick Morrow does a phenomenal job, trying to navigate a lot of these things that are being thrown on his plate as the college sports industry is, evolving, right? And, some people can look at it from a negative situation. I think that I try to look at the glass half full and, how can we adapt? How can we create an advantage to ourselves and to our program, to put ourselves in the best position possible to field the best team? So.
A few more minutes here with Drew Linder. He's the recruiting coordinator for UNF baseball. Head coach Joe Mercadante. After his first season, these guys are getting down to it and trying to recruit and get some of the best talent from around the country to come to UNF. And I think this is going to be a big opportunity in helping them do that. In our conversation here with the increase of scholarships with baseball, Drew, I was thinking about this earlier. I've seen some like kind of anonymous comments from coaches about how this is going to be big for us. This is going to be big for the so-called mid-major programs. I saw the Clemson head coach was talking about this, and he said that, this is one of the best pieces of news that we've gotten in a long time. How do you think the coaching staff reacts to this kind of news?
Oh, I think we're all excited about it. And it's certainly for us, it's going to, kind of like I said earlier on the call, it's going to force us to evaluate guys a little bit more. It's right. Going to force us, force the hand to truly get out there, to truly, spend some time and find out what these young athletes can and can't do. From the numbers side of things, I think when you can spend time with 34 guys, and I think that you can spend time developing those 34 guys in the fall, it's going to ultimately put yourself in a better position, as you roll into the spring. There's certainly, times when we were in COVID and years of extra eligibility and sometimes having 40, 45 guys out there, it's tough to navigate that sometimes when you only have 4 coaches out there on the field. And I think when you can condense it into a smaller number and you can spend more time with these guys and, truly implement your system and be very detail oriented, in the fall, it's only going to put yourself in a position where everything's clicking as you roll into the spring, versus, trying to develop with the masses. Right. And, I think for us and the way that we like to run things here at North Florida, we certainly feel like we have a system. We certainly feel like we have a good foundation of a development program. And, it's going to allow us to spend more one-on-one time with guys, in a little bit of a smaller setting. And, really maximize what we can get out of our guys, from a talent perspective, and be able to push the limits with guys and be able to put them in situations where, maybe they're uncomfortable at times, in a practice setting because there's a lot of numbers around them, versus now where we can get one-on-one time with them and really put them in a position where they can excel and, ultimately help us go win an ASUN title.
That's the goal, right? I've seen that a lot of the conferences like the ACC and Big 12 and SEC, they're going to be 34 fully scholarship, teams. But, if you have a team like UNF or JU or somewhere in the ASUN, will you guys be at 34? Where will that number land, do you feel like, for you?
I don't really know. I know that, obviously we're in talks right now, and that's, one of those unknown questions that we have. We certainly want to, get everything that, we feel like will be a situation where we can be successful.
Right.
And I know, as a staff, we're continuing to talk with our athletic department here. And, I think that's not just here at UNF. I think a lot of staffs around the country are trying to, map that out and see what that looks like. And I think that's where a lot of the unknowns are on how that thing is going to operate from a financial standpoint. And it certainly isn't going to be something, obviously, we just got the news last week. And
Mm.
I know that Nick and his staff over there in the athletic department are working hard to, try to come up with an answer for us from that standpoint. And I think that they're doing everything they can because I think that they're an advocate for the baseball program here. And I think that wherever that number falls, it's going to be very competitive, at least within our conference and the mid-major conference. So,
Do you feel like this scholarship increase, does it, and I'm asking you because I don't know the answer, do you feel like this evens the playing field, or is that not fair to say? Do you feel like this increase is something like that, or how do you feel about that?
yeah, I don't know that it necessarily evens the playing field, right? Because I think, each school is going to kind of do what they feel like is necessary, behind the support of their programs. It's certainly, the Power Four, if you want to call it now, it's certainly become more of a numbers game for them. And I think that, most of those big time schools are going to find ways to fully fund their programs at 34. But I think what it does is it allows for the talent level at mid majors to be increased. I think that's what we're excited about, right? I think, we're all baseball guys. We're all, whether you were fans, kids growing up around the game, what this is going to allow the game to do is just become more competitive, right? And as competitors, that's ultimately what we feed off of, is more of a competitive environment. And, when you start looking at the talent levels at the mid major, I think you're going to see some increases in that. So it's not necessarily fair to necessarily say, hey, is this going to be a level playing field, as much as, hey, is this going to maybe allow us to put a better product out there on the field?
Is this something that, would you say that your staff and really staffs across the country, is this something that baseball coaches and administrators have been looking forward to for a long time? Would you say that's fair to say?
Well, I think baseball coaches have been looking forward to it for a long time. I don't know if administrators would say the same thing. Obviously this has provided a lot of question marks on their end that, they have to find answers to, from that standpoint. But I think that we as baseball coaches have have had the challenge of 11.7 for a long time, and football coaches and basketball coaches, they didn't really have to understand that. We have to run our own front office,
Right.
with a small staff, right? And be able to put values on guys, and, and it's not always about, hey, what is the value that we think that kid, is on a roster, as much as, hey, what is the value on that kid to get a yes from them, a commitment from them, right? So, now there's still going to be some of that component on it, because I don't think some programs will get all the way to the 34, but I think when you look at it as a whole, as a coaching side of things, it's definitely an interesting time in college baseball. It's an exciting time. I've always said, and, Coach Martin, when I was at Florida State, always said that, you have to be adaptive. And, things are going to evolve, things and obstacles that you're going to face in this game are constantly going to be thrown in front of you. And, how can you adapt? How can you put yourself in a position where you can separate yourselves from your peers? I think that that's a lot of what we're trying to do here in North Florida.
Final moment or two here with you, Drew. Really appreciate the time. Very interesting conversation for baseball folks like me and all the people that watch and listen. And I think explain to people, Drew, what the 11.7 scholarships means. Where did that come from? What does that mean?
So, and I was obviously long before my time when I got in this game coaching, but for the longest time, for as long as I can remember, in college baseball, we had 11.7 scholarships based off of a cost of attendance, and that was the cap that you could have. And ultimately you could divvy up those 11.7 scholarships, amongst 27 to 32. At one point, it got all the way up to 32 guys. So when you had a roster of 40, you still had to have 8 walk-on guys, that were not on athletics aid. But, so that ultimately created a little bit of a, situation where you had to get really creative with that money, and put different values on guys, to build your roster out. And I think now with the change in the evolve going to 34, it's certainly going to take some of that decision making of values out of guys. But then again, you have a whole other factor, and I don't know that we have enough time today to talk necessarily about the NIL component of it, but that is certainly another monster in the game of college athletics for sure. But I think when you look at it, and you look at the situation, it's certainly going to provide a lot of opportunities for guys to potentially get a lot of their schooling paid for in today's game.
I heard, and I've heard from football coaches who have said that, this will eliminate walk-ons. Is that the case in baseball?
It's all going to depend. It may not eliminate that completely. I think if you have some programs that only get to maybe 18 or 20 scholarships, you're still going to have some walk-on guys in there, to make the numbers work and the math work on it. But like I said, that just kind of leans back to a lot of unanswered questions. And I think that's going to be on a program to program basis, from the walk-on standpoint. So,
Right.
it's always neat though, too. I think that, over time in college baseball, I've been a part of, 8 rosters now. And I think the exciting time is when the young man comes in as a walk-on and, kind of plays his way into a scholarship after year 2 or 3. That's always a neat time, a neat celebration for a young man that's worked really hard to ultimately get that. So, it's definitely not probably going to take away the walk-on standpoint, but I think there'll be fewer of those guys out there now. Yes.
Yeah, for example, like Florida State, they're going to take on the full 34 and they won't have another spot for another guy, right? Is that the case?
That could be the case. Yeah, yeah. And they're still trying to iron out, the true factors and all the fine print that rolls around the 34 man roster and the 34 scholarships. So, like I said, I still think that, we have some questions to answer before we can divulge into this thing and set a master plan. I mean, we certainly are preparing, ourselves for, whatever's coming down the pipeline, but to say that we have a definite plan in place, is not the case at this current time.
All right, Drew, as I let you go here today, really appreciate a few minutes of your time. How was the first year with Coach Mercadante? What would you say that the first year was like?
Yeah, I think that, the first year as a whole it was a learning curve for all of us.
Yep.
Coach Merck, first time head coach, and, phenomenal human being. One of the best coaches that I've worked under. And obviously, I worked under Coach Bell at Pitt, and, I could say the same thing about him as well. But, not to take away from Coach Merck and everything that he has in place. I think it's a guy that's very well respected in the state. The guys love playing for him. And I think that's, an important aspect as a head coach in today's world. And, he's got great relationships around the state of Florida, great relationships that he's built in a short amount of time around the city. And, he's got great visions for where he wants to take this program. And great support staff and great coaching staff, and Coach Petrosky's, our pitching coach here, did a phenomenal job, turning around the pitching side of things. And, I think it's really neat to see where this thing came in a short amount of time. And obviously the wins and losses definitely weren't exactly where we wanted it to be, but, ultimately the trajectory of this program and where the foundation got built over the last 365 days to put us on the trajectory that we're on now is an exciting time for us. And, I think that we're excited about the roster that we got coming in this year. That we spent time in the transfer portal and junior college ranks and, even the high school guys that, we put together last fall in the 24 class. So we're certainly excited to get these guys on campus here in a couple of weeks. And, as we build this thing and as Coach Mercadante says, it's one day at a time. Let's win the day. Let's be the best we can that day. And, we'll cross the bridges and the other avenues once they get in front of us.
Drew Linder is the recruiting coordinator, assistant coach with UNF. Coach Mercadante right by his side on the coaching staff there at the University of North Florida. Drew, thanks so much for your time. I know this is a lot of information, a lot of unanswered questions about the scholarship increase for baseball, but really appreciate your insight. Thank you.
No, appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on. And like I said, I think once we get a little bit more of the fine print around the 34, I'd love to hop back on and we can divulge into this thing a little bit more. But it's definitely an interesting topic, and you've done a great job around the city of Jacksonville with what you're doing. Supporting the game of baseball and supporting Jacksonville sports for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. Appreciate it.
Thank you.